Welcome to our bi-monthly Bridge Culture Club. Today we're discussing Know the Mother. Today's event is hosted by Bridge, Michigan. I'm Jackie Garrett. My colleague Amber DeLind is here as well, who will be hosting. And thank you all for joining us today. In case you weren't familiar with us, Bridge, Michigan is Michigan's nonprofit, nonpartisan news source covering issues that matter to you and your community. You can subscribe for free at bridgemi.com. And for those who are current Bridge Club members, which include people who have donated to Bridge over the last year, those folks get a number of benefits, including access to a free electronic copy of each Bridge Culture Club selection. And you can become a member today by visiting the link we will drop into the chat in just a moment. Today, we are so lucky to be joined by the author, Desiree Cooper. I will give a full introduction of her momentarily, but we're incredibly honored that she was willing to join us for a discussion of her book. The schedule for today's discussion is as follows. I'll give an introduction of Desiree Cooper, and then Amber will lead a discussion with Desiree about the book for about 40 minutes, and then we'll take reader questions for the author. You can type your questions into the chat at any time, and then we'll conclude by 1 p.m. We're recording this discussion and we'll be posting the recording on Bridge's website, www.bridgemi.com. And now I would like to introduce author Desiree Cooper. A 2015 Kresge Artist Fellow, Desiree Cooper is a former attorney, Pulitzer Prize-nominated journalist, and community activist. She is an evocative speaker on the themes of racial and gender equality, reproductive freedom, family-positive public policy, and the welfare of women and girls. As a full-time caregiver, she writes widely about women, self-care, and reinvention. A sought-after creative writing instructor, she conducts readings from her award-winning flash fiction collection, Know the Mother, like an instant book club. Cooper's latest publication is a children's picture book, Nothing Special, based upon the friendship between her father and grandson. It has earned a starred review from Booklist, inclusion in the New York Public Library's list of the top 10 children's books of 2022, and winner of the 2023 Patterson Prize for Books for Young People. She was a founding board member of Cave Canem, a national residency for Black poets, and has received residencies at Kimbilio and Ragdale. Having forged a 30-year career in Detroit, she now lives in the Virginia Beach area where she cares for her aging mother and raises 3 grandchildren. And now I will pass it over to Amber to get us started.
Thanks so much, Jackie. And Des, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are super honored that you are here.
I'm so excited. I neglected to put in my background that I was there at the beginning of Bridge. And so I'm super excited to kind of come full circle and be back with the Bridge family again. So thank you so much and thank you, Jackie. I know you're still there for that introduction.
Wonderful. Well, we are really very proud to be part of this full circle moment and grateful that you're here. So I really enjoyed Know the Mother. I've gotten a lot of feedback from our readers that they did as well, and I'm certain that they're going to have a lot of questions today. But when you and I were emailing, we talked about perhaps starting with a reading of one of the stories. So without any further ado, I welcome you to read Know the Mother, the title story from this collection.
All right, will do. Thank you. Know the Mother. As I wash my mother's back, her scent fills my nostrils. Already she smells like a garden unearthed, a freshly dug grave. I soak a cloth in warm water in witch hazel. She sighs as I swab her shrunken thighs, her shriveled feet. Don't leave me, I plead beneath my breath. She twitches and my heart leaps. Maybe she's changed her mind and has decided to stay with me a little longer. But for the next 3 hours, she gives me nothing to hold on to. Not one fluttering eyelid, not a wan smile of possibility. She's leaving me so easily, I wonder if her love ever rose above duty. 2 months ago, I was bringing worn sheets up from the dryer in the basement, and as I reached the top of the stairs, I could hear Mother singing. I dashed around the corner, half expecting to see her remaking the bed, lifting the mattress to miter the corners. But when I reached her room, nothing had changed. Her hair was still a thin layer of down. Her cheeks were still sallow. Her shoulder blades jutted beneath the summer blanket as if she were hiding her favorite book beneath the covers. Yet somehow, as she slept, she was a young woman again, singing. At her bedside, I doze without resting. I dream that my mother is dressed in a black taffeta gown. Her cheeks are rouged with stage makeup, eyes shimmering. On cue, she makes her way to the curtain. I call her name 3 times, but nothing I say can make her look back.
Thank you so much, Des. This is one of the many stories that I think I found very moving, and I'm sure many of our readers did as well. I have lots of questions about these stories, but I know that one thing that our readers often tell us they're interested in knowing, because we choose an author or a director or a podcast producer who has a connection to Michigan, if you could tell us a little bit about your connections to Michigan.
So I always say that I married Michigan. I met the man who was to be my husband when I was in law school in Virginia, which is more my native territory. I was a military brat, so my parents are Virginians, but I'm sort of from everywhere. And I met the Detroiter in law school. And so that's where we started our lives together. And I spent I always say adulted in Detroit. I spent my next 30 years having a very kind of schizophrenic job career until I went back to my first love, which was writing, and was a columnist at the Free Press, and have later just gone from journalism into creative writing.
Excellent. Thank you for helping us sort of understand your connection. And it sort of sparked some more questions for me, but I'll get to them.
Okay.
So my next question is just in general, how did you decide to write Know the Mother? Did you always know that this was going to be a collection, or did you have stories that you assembled? How did it come together?
So since the age of 4, I always wanted to be a creative writer. In my mind, that meant writing books, stories. And I did a stint where I thought I wanted to be an astronaut, but who didn't? I was 9 years old when they walked on the moon, so of course. Um, but I ended up going to college and law school, college and journalism, then law school, because everyone around me said that's not a real job. Writing's not a real job. And so journalism was the only way to make a living as a writer. And I enjoyed journalism. But when I finally got the chance to be a creative writer, I would just carve out the time wherever I could. Journalism taught me a lot about compression and getting to the point quickly, and which I'm not doing now. And and so I found this is the point. I found that when I did have a chance to write, not only did I not have time, I have a busy family and a career going on, but also I had been trained to write short. And so Know the Mother came out of years of me taking very, very short little snippets of time I had to just crank out a very compressed crystalline story. And so this genre is called flash fiction. Generally, it's defined as about 1,000 words per story. Most of mine are closer to 750, which was the column length that I was writing. So a lot of people find it very hard to write short, but for me, I couldn't write long. Over time, I did not have the chops or the time to do that. And so this became my sort of weapon of choice as a writer. So Know the Mother was part of just cranking these little stories out little by little by little over time. The story that I just read to you, the title story, Know the Mother, was written when I was a young mother. My kids are now 37 and 35. So, 3 decades ago, I'm writing this story about a woman caring for her mother in the last moments of her mother's life. And it was not autobiographical. My mother is very much alive back then. She just passed away this year at 90.
I'm so sorry.
But what the commentary was how easy is for a woman in America, especially a daughter in America, to envision that she is going to have to be the caregiver for her family in the future because our public policy is get a girl to do it. That's how we bring people into the world. That's how we take care of babies. And that's how we take care of our sick, infirm, and elderly. There's no support. And so we know that this is our future. And that's, as a feminist, I'm trying to write that story, but very viscerally, one-on-one in the moment, what the daughter feels like and how she does not know her mother.
Yeah, and you feel it. You feel it as a reader. At least I did. That's for sure. So you mentioned just now with the story Know the Mother that this wasn't autobiographical while you were writing it. Are any of the women in the story based on people you know, or are there situations or lived experience based in real life in any way?
I always say this, the stories are all fiction and they're all true. And that's the best part about fiction is that you can use that as a vehicle to write the absolute truth of something. So some of them came to be with a thought, which is how Know the Mother, the idea, the commentary about what aging means for caregivers. Um, but many were situations of picking my kids up from school or traveling with my kids. Many were from the circle of my friends and family dealing with illness, all sorts of things and situations. And what would pull those things into this volume for me is whether or not I felt like the story could shed some light on sexism or racism or both as they're interacting in a story in a way that's not rhetorical or political, but how it's lived and experienced.
Yeah. And I think, at least for me, it made the stories even more powerful because they were so personal. They felt like it could be a daily life that is happening to me or to someone I know or to a friend or to my mom. And that's what's so powerful. We touched on this just a moment ago, but the concept of caregiving with both its beauty and its heartbreak is really woven through many of the stories in Know the Mother. Is there anything that you hoped that the reader specifically would take away from those themes in the story?
Probably when I was writing most of them, I really wanted to make the caregiver visible. Because my actual caregiving experience, not for my kids, of course, but for my parents, didn't come until much later. Um, but what I knew is that there are so many women who are really forced by life circumstance into caregiving, whether they choose to or not. It's hard, and it requires a ridiculous amount of self-suffocation. um, of stunting your desires, your needs in order to make this happen. And I wanted the stories to shed a light on what it was like, the ambivalence. Actually, many of the stories shed light on the ambivalence that women have toward that ideal of mothering and caregiving. That just because we have ovaries, we don't automatically know where the socks are. And we don't automatically want to put our jobs way, way down on the line, or we don't automatically give up our dreams and be happy about it. Um, and there's so much pressure, I think, in our society for women to just jump into these roles and assume it's going to happen and just keep it moving. So I wanted to be able to stop a minute and just let people really focus on what you're asking of people to do this.
Absolutely. This is another concept that we've touched on a bit here. So, as we talked about in your very impressive biography, you're an award-winning journalist. Are there ways other than sort of being focused and writing short? Are there ways that your reporting skills and sort of journalistic instincts play a role in your fiction writing?
Well, I do think that one of the blessings of being a columnist is that I didn't have to tell one story. It's like every day when I went to work was a different day at work. It was a different job, depending on who I was, whose life I was falling into. And that served me well as a flash fiction writer. I have had a criticism of the stories where people are like, can't you just write the whole story? Like, I'm at the end of page two of a story. They're only about 3 pages, most of them. And they're like, well, where's the rest of it? And I have to say, I had so many stories that if I had to spin them all out, I would still be spinning. I felt like there was this sort of reservoir that an outpouring of stories that I really wanted to get onto paper. And so being a journalist, I knew that I could communicate a story in short space and do a lot of them, um, and that they could work together. It was great training. It was great training. Yeah.
That Do you ever have an instinct to revisit any of the stories or the sort of the characters and lengthen them out, or is that just once you've captured that, do you move past?
I do feel, and maybe again, this comes from column writing, and that is when it's done, it's done. You're on to, what's the next story? And so I can't say I'm sort of haunted by any character in Know the Mother that I want to revisit. I have toyed with linking them in some way,
Mm,
for the benefit of maybe, a play or something like that, where the stories can be part of a continuum or a narrative of the same characters. But I've never really thought of like plucking out one and this is the beginning of a novel.
sure. Fair enough. Uh, Speaking of the stories, this may be a really unfair question, and you can tell me if so. But do you have a favorite amongst the stories, and if so, why? That is that one your favorite?
I I'm not sure that I have a favorite. Um, I'm sort of fond of a couple of the stories, draw upon my life as a military kid. And I often think that I want to maybe write more stories
Mm,
about that life experience. And so those are closer to autobiographical and really special to me. Um, I have a story that is definitely the most disliked story in the
mm,
collection. Not from me necessarily, but from audience. And it's called something goes bump in the night, I think is the name of it.
mm,
um, and it's weird. It's a weird story, where a woman is replaying um, a home invasion, basically. She's asleep in the house and she hears something happening. Something falls in tonight. Thank you for the chat person, Darlene. Um, and she's replaying how she's going to get her kids and escape out over and over and over again. And each time there's just like this little change in the scenario where she has more and more agency until finally she's the aggressor. And so the story for me was a thought experiment, kind of. A couple of these are that came from that. It's how to turn up a story, repeat it, and up the ante every time you repeat it. Um, and much to my shock, out of all the stories in this collection, that's the story that showed up in the Norton Anthology Collection of American Flash Fiction. And I was horrified. I mean, I'm glad that that happened, but like to a number, audiences like, what's the deal with that story? Like, what were you thinking? It's a little creepy and science fictiony and weird. So you never know. There's no accountant for taste.
Oh man. That one, I did actually. I'm really glad we talked about it because I did want to ask you about a little bit just about sort of that sort of was my take is that it's just her sort of replaying the scenario, but I wasn't sure, so that actually helps me sort of
Mhm.
understand the intent on that one. Um, you're we've some of these themes are emerging, but they're ones that I sort of picked up on as I read the collection. Your stories confront directly painful topics such as racism and miscarriage. How do you think fiction can help a reader
Mhm.
to connect with or explore topics that are sometimes avoided in public narrative?
Yeah, well, I think that's almost the job of a storyteller, you know? Um, I do feel that I remember one person who read the collection said, it's it's not a happy book. Is there anything good about motherhood? And first of all, I was a little surprised by that reaction because I don't feel like they're all just totally somber. But what I said to that person was, you want happy? Go to the Hallmark store because it's already been told. The stories that haven't been told are the stories about the on the ground complicated feelings of, in particular, being a mother. And I feel like through fiction, I'm able to find readers um, who will shy away from something that's just a lot more I'm a journalist, reported or even political, a rant, so to speak. I can come and rant at you about childcare, lack of childcare, and rant at you about lack of senior care. But if you read a story about a woman who has Alzheimer's and rambling around in her house and not knowing what day it is and that she's going to her own daughter's funeral, then you get way more empathy, way more understanding. Like even before you know what's happening in the story, you're engaged. You have a stake in it. And so you're not asking, is this a Democrat or Republican? You're not asking if this person are working class, are they wealthy? You're not asking these questions. Are they Southerners or Northerners? All you are is falling into the humanity of the story. And so I do think that you can definitely break more ground that way. And I write fiction with that in mind. It's not a frivolous pursuit for me.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes appealing to, so much of our sort of political discourse or policy or public discourse is so rooted in our assumptions, and also it's very tries to be like cerebral, but when you can appeal
Yes.
to someone the way someone what they feel and what their lived experience is, that can be really powerful and can connect in a way that maybe we avoid in our daily interaction. So
Yes.
I
Yeah.
really saw that in the stories. I have a few more questions for you, but then we have a couple of questions that were pre-submitted, but I also want to encourage our viewers who are on today's discussion, please feel free to type your questions in the chat at any time because I'll be turning to your questions soon. So mothers are portrayed in this collection at really various stages of their lives, from early pregnancy all the way to as grandmothers. Why was it important to sort of share perspectives of motherhood at a variety of stages? We don't always see that in
Hmm.
sort of media.
Well, it's an aphorism like, motherhood never ends. And on that, to be fair, parenting maybe never ends. Um, but I do feel that at many different stages of life, what is called upon to be a mother changes, what the ability for a mother to mother, and then of course mothers become the recipient of mothering. And so what that feels like, it's sort of like the passing of the baton and how we experience it as children, as daughters, and then as the caregiver, mother, and then as the recipient of the care. And so I definitely wanted to explore what that continuum feels like.
Yeah, and sort of personally, sort of in that middle ground. I have a young child. My mom is here, and she cared for her mother. So I like it. Just seeing that full spectrum for me
Hmm.
meant a lot, and I'm sure I've heard from readers that, seeing that portrayal at those various stages isn't always so common. And I
Mhm.
think it means a lot to someone who's
Mhm.
experienced multiple sort of places in that, or at least has seen that amongst people they know and love.
Yes, absolutely. But it's also there to talk about the expectation doesn't end,
Mm-hmm.
and it's internalized for a lot of women. So even if they are technically, free for that, like free, go around the planet, travel, and they're like, no, but where are the grandkids? And I've got to do, so it's so internalized that it's sometimes hard to even envision yourself away from it. And that's part of what that story, Know the Mother, is about. It's like this daughter, at the time that her mother is dying, is realizing that maybe her mother had a life that she never even knew about. This woman is singing in her sleep. She's never heard her sing. Was this a dream for her? You know, was this something that I never knew that my mother wanted and that she never got to have, or she put it so far back that she never even talked about it? And so it becomes a lifetime way of being that consumes everything, for many women.
Absolutely. One thing that I noted is that the settings of each story often play a key role in the plot and sort of the central conflict. Sometimes it seems like the setting is sort of a character in and of itself. How
Mhm.
did you decide where to set each story? Did you know going in that there were certain stories you wanted in certain places, or did it just hit you as you were writing it?
Um, okay, so I don't think it was necessarily intentional unless the spark for the story came from the setting. But after it was done, I did notice how many car scenes there were, how many is involved in cars, and maybe this didn't occur to you while you were looking at them, but now I'm thinking, and maybe this is the military brat coming out in me because we did so much traveling and driving across the country in a car, and the car can be such an intense closed space where things are happening in each person's head, or maybe it's a safe space where things are happening outside and it's a safety, and that would be reporting for duty. It um the story of a military man, which my dad was, traveling across the country with his kids and coming across racism in the 50s. And the car was the safe place. And then there's a number of scenes where couples are in a car and various things are happening there. So that's kind of weird. Like I want to sort of go into that. Like why did that happen for me? It could have also been the form because it is short. The setting has to provide some momentum and intensity, so that
Sure.
you can set fire to a story quickly, you know.
Yeah.
So that was part of it as well.
Absolutely. One question I did want to ask, just because of the sort of knowing that you have a, sort of a history as part of being part of a military family. Did your family spend some time in Japan? I noticed that as sort of a setting for a few of the questions. So
Yes, I was
that
born
stories
in
rather.
Japan.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I was born in Japan, and we were assigned overseas. My dad was assigned overseas 3 times, and each time we went back to Japan. So in my teenage all the way through my teenage years, we lived in Japan 9 of my first 14 years, off and on, not contiguous years. Um, and so I went back and forth. I was like 14 the last time we were there, and I lived there before we came to the United States. So,
Very cool. Thank you. I have just a couple more questions and then I'm going to throw it. I saw Jan asked a question and we had a pre-submitted question for some readers as well. So um, if if folks like this format of flash fiction or just any recommendations you have, are there other books you would recommend to our readers?
oh, that's a sucker punch. All right. So first of all, flash fiction is really the subject. I'm Googling something at the same time. Really the subject of a lot of collections.
Hmm.
The collections of short stories. There are more writers write flash that go into anthologies, then they have an entire book. Do you know how hard it is to write 31 stories?
I can.
They're so
No,
short.
I
You
mean,
have
I
to,
sounds insane.
it's almost like what poets go through, putting a collection
Yeah.
together. So um, I would suggest collections, and there's so many anthologies. And if you just Google flash fiction or short fiction, microfiction, you will just get just an array of lovely collections of flash fiction. And there's a lot of places online that publish flash for free that you can find online. River Teeth is a website. River Teeth is one word.
Mm.
Wigleaf is another one. Brevity is another one. So Flash is everywhere. It's at your Google fingertips. But I'm sorry that I'm not doing just
Okay.
one collection because it's Lydia Davis is a famous Flash fiction writer. And now I'm blanking on a few others. So I'll throw them out as we go forward.
That sounds wonderful. When as we heard in your bio, you've also written, poetry and essays. What are the sort of differences and similarities in the different forms? And is there one that you sort of gravitate to most often?
Well, I'm only just now realizing that essay is a very obvious offshoot from journalism, from column writing. Um, and and so my work is starting to waft into essay, but I call myself a genre agnostic. And that means I have a children's book out. I mean, I think really I my first book came out, Nor the Mother came out when I was 56. And so to have your first book out at 56, um, I felt like I was making up for a lot of childhood dreams and lost time. And so I'm not going to sit here and say, well, I'm a flash writer. I'm only going to read. I'm going to say, I'm going to write whatever the hell I want to write. And hopefully it'll meet the light of day or I'll get it good enough that it deserves publication. But if not, this is what I'm enjoying and I'm experimenting. So I would say that flash came out of me sort of stuck and holding on to the idea that I would be a novelist and I'm going to tell fictional stories one day. This was my life's dream. And Flash melded that dream with writing short. But now that I've kind of been able to get that out of my system a little bit, now I'm just sort of branching out and I'm finding that Flash is 750 words, but now my essays are 3,000 words. It's like, who knew I could go that far? So I feel like um, if I were to predict the next project of my own work, it will probably be a collection of essays and probably about the caregiving journey. I don't know, but I just finished editing a collection of essays, an anthology that will be out in 2026.
Oh, excellent.
And it's called Black Summers. We don't have the subtitle yet, but it's a collection from a bunch of wonderful Detroit writers writing about how race shaped their experience of outdoors in Detroit in the summertime. And so that sounds kind of confining, but if you think about for how long African Americans couldn't leave the city, part of it is an offshoot of my work around the woman who integrated the boblo boat, and so access to parks, outside to services to pools. And so the stories really navigate, you know, how people worked around that. What did they do instead, and how did they engage with nature in the city? So I'm really excited about
Absolutely. I'm sure lots, myself included, but lots of us
that.
will be as well. Is there a certain publisher we should be looking for it in
Yeah,
the
it's coming from Wayne State University Press. Yay, yay, yay.
wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'm going to turn to a couple of reader questions now, if that's
Mhm.
okay. Jan in our chat asked, do you teach a class for writers?
I do. You would have to, my website is descooper.com. And so you can always go there and find out if I've got something going on, or you can find me on Facebook, Des Cooper Author. But I teach regularly with a program called Monthly Mentorship. And you can find more about that at monthlymentorship.org. But that's set up like an academic class on an academic calendar, and it's the same cohort of people. And we stay together from September through March, and we go through different craft ideas and lessons. And that's probably not for the beginning writer, but for someone who has a little bit of an idea of what they're doing and what they want to do and need support getting there. So check that out, monthlymentorship.org.
I'm going to type that into the chat right now.
Thank you.
Of course. So Darlene talks about the story, The Disappearing Girl, and how powerful it was, and why, really being seen and feeling seen is so important, and how oftentimes we don't, especially, when things like race and gender and other things lead to us feeling invisible. She asked, how do you think we can become self-aware when we might be unintentionally or intentionally making others feel invisible? What sort of responsibility do we have to recognize
Well,
that?
the only responsibility that you have is to grow, because you're going to make people feel uncomfortable, because we're human beings and that's what we do. Asking that question is a huge first step in understanding that. And also, I'm a fan of gentle critique. It's not condemning and it's not shaming, but wow, was that a mistake? Should I have said that? Well, go back and ask the person, or think about it and promise yourself that the next time I'm in this position, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. It's just about growing as a human being. And there's just so much that we just know better now. We just know better now that we didn't know before. And some of that was willful ignorance. But if you're asking the question, then you're not willfully ignorant anymore. You know, you start doing different readings, you stretch yourself, you expose yourself to different people in particular. But also that's Amber, we're right back to where we started, how fiction and literature can just take you so many places and open your eyes to so many things. So Disappearing Girl is a take on Invisible Man. And so the idea there is a little girl is experiencing microaggressions in school where nothing else is wrong and no one's really being mean. It's just that she's not belonging, and she's getting very clear signals that this isn't her place because of her race. And the mother is relating because the mother remembers as a child being one of the first to integrate in her environment, in her school, and how she was treated, and how that just eroded her self-esteem. And so at the end, the mother sort of confronts the child and says, I see you. You're invisible, but I see this. And then if we were doing this as my instant book club, I'd ask the question, what happens next? And so I think the implication for the story is that the child is not going back into that environment. And the story questions something that we take as true, and that is integration is good. We don't question that, right? Politically speaking. And yet, good for who? And are there harms as well? And I think that the story does show that plopping a child into a segregated environment, it was white segregated, she's integrating the environment, is not integrating her into the environment. And that does a lot of harm. So we don't question that. It's a value. And I think there are many people. This is one thing that I experienced in Detroit, how the Black community there does question things like that, in a way that it's just sort of just taken as gospel in so many different places. And the question is, what is best and good for my child? I get to ask that, like everyone gets to ask that question.
Absolutely. Asking a critical question of good for who.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We did have a reader question who they mentioned that the story's soft landing and second sleep, they had a little bit of a hard time sort of understanding the big sort of central theme of each, and they wondered if you could just sort of explore those two stories for them.
Okay, so second sleep is another weird one. And I got the idea for that story out of stumbling across that term, second sleep. And so evidently in the Victorian age, it was normal for people to go to bed when it got dark, especially in the winter, which would be early, so by 7 o'clock or something, everyone just goes to bed. And then they wake up like at 1 a.m. or something. You got a good 5 hours under your belt at that point. And they may have meals, they may read, they may, make love. And then you go back for your second sleep, those next few hours before dawn. And so I was thinking, wow, second sleep. So that was the genesis of the story. I wanted to write about second sleep. And so the story is about a woman who does wake up in the middle of the night and she realizes that there's a party going on downstairs in her house. And she goes downstairs to find, basically, it's the ghosts of the past. People that are no longer living are yucking it up and having meals and stuff in the kitchen. And she's with them again for a moment until she goes back up for the second sleep. So this is something that many authors experience. And I think in Flash, I have found it maybe more than others. And that is the stories are so fast and open-ended that the reader takes the story the next step. And so you can get three people in a room reading that same 3 pages and they have three different interpretations of exactly what is happening. And so my intent, I don't often do this part. My intent is a real life woman, probably older in her age, and she's lived alone a long time. And it's just when she wakes up, these ghosts are just consuming her mind, the grief that and the loneliness. And she's with the ghost for a while until it's time to go back to bed. Many people have read it as the woman has died. So the first sleep is her death when you start the story. And then she wakes up as the ghost to join the other ghosts. Okay. And so that's like the second sleep. Brilliant. Yeah, I meant that. I don't know. But the idea is that, what I do try to do is plant enough language or pointers or breadcrumbs in a story that people can take it that way. And it's justified by they can find their proof to get there. So I love that if I've accidentally on purpose created a little puzzle. The other one, Soft Landing, is another Genesis. I think this is the only one in this collection that the Genesis is trying to write a dream. So for those of you who are writers out there, that's a writing prompt for you is like try to make a story out of a dream because dreams make no sense. And I know a lot of people dream about flying. And I wanted to get on paper what it felt like in my dreams when I was flying in my dreams, which I have a lot. And then once I started that description, I was like, okay, now where is this story going to go? So the story is surreal. The woman is real, and she really does go to the airport and she really does get on a plane. But after that, we're not real sure, like, is she hallucinating that she can fly? Is this like a fairy tale where she really can fly? And then she does find, people who are like her and realizes that there's like a lot of people that can fly, but they don't know it yet. They haven't found each other. and then a big disaster happens, but these people who can fly transcend the disaster. So lots of metaphor going on there, but it just kind of came out of my idea of how do I get a dream down on paper. I also have a phobia,
Mm,
and my phobia is I'm a blood phobic
mm,
and well, I have two of them, and a fish phobic. I do not like live fish. I have gone fishing and the fish gets on the end of that hook and I'm crazy trying to get away from this fish. I can't stand it. I can eat fish. I don't like aquariums, but I've raised kids. I've been to plenty of them. I'm just like, wow. I went snorkeling and I see the fish underneath in the water and the scream bubbles coming up through the snorkel where someone out there is hearing. I hate them. I hate them. But I don't know why. I mean, a lot of people are phobic of blood or heights, but fish. And so there's a story in the collection called Ichthyophobia or Ichthyophobe,
mhm.
which is fish fear fish. And it was only my self-analysis. It's like I want to write a story about what what would bring someone to be afraid of fish. The whole story is made up because I can't figure out why I'm afraid of fish. But if we start at the end and regress, what brought this person to this moment? That's what the story is. Why is this
I
person
love that.
afraid
I love that. Thank
of
you for sharing. I didn't mean to make you delve into your
Oversharing,
fears.
yes.
I
Sorry.
love it. I've got one last question for you, and then I will hand it over to Jackie. Our one of our readers, Lynn, asked the question of, a lot of the topics that you're touching on in these stories are deep. They're intense emotions. How do you sort of personally cope with sort of those feelings to stay balanced? Does that emotion of your writing affect you as a person, or is it a release?
Um, maybe both. Um, Sometimes I've sat with something so long, and shared it with so many people that I'm very confident that I'm not the only one feeling that way. And I think when I'm in that space, I'm able to get it on paper without a lot of sort of re-traumatizing myself or upsetting myself. And again, this might come from column writing too, where I was putting myself out all the time and getting feedback. And it's like, when we say overshare, I'm like, what? Everyone's done everything. Who cares? And so I got a little bit of chops with that. But there are times where it's the first time I'm really trying to really digest something. And it can be very, very hard to get it on paper. And what I often do if I'm writing in that space is to get it on paper and put it away and don't go back to it. And it can be a year before I'm back to it, just depending on how I'm doing. And then from that, the safety of the space, I can go back and hone it into a story. So I love the question because as a writer, you have to really protect protect your soul, your spirit, your heart, because you are putting it on the page. And for me, it's not the fact of sharing, it's the fact of making it real by putting it on the page or going through it again by putting it on the page.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this and for this beautiful collection. I think so many of us enjoyed it. Is there anything that you want, kind of final word you want to have to the viewers today, or anything they should be looking out for in the future?
Um, I'd say go and gobble up some Flash. It's the beautiful thing about it, and it applies to this collection too, is often they're not connected. And so if you're like me and you fall asleep after 3 pages of reading, get it in. You can get in at the doctor's office, when you have a second and you can flip through it like a magazine and just sort of go through it. It's bonbons, and just pick a chocolate and enjoy it. So I think Flash is just so, so special. I just love it as a genre. So if this is your introduction into it, please explore more. It's really fun.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Des. I'm going to hand it over now to my colleague, Jackie.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Desiree and Amber. We will be posting this recording on Bridge, Michigan this week if you'd like to see it again or share it out. This recording will also show on our events page on our new app. So if you don't already have that, please do go look for it in the App Store. Culture Club events are held every other month, but this is the last one for 2024. Please keep your eye on your inbox for a post-event survey where we'll ask for suggestions of books, films, and podcasts for us to consider for Culture Club events in 2025. And if you'd like to be eligible to receive our next Culture Club selection, please consider becoming a Bridge Club member today. Thanks, everybody, again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.